Hey everyone, Pastor Mike here, called Life Family Worship. Just wanted to slip in a few words of commentary on some of the recent issues that have come up. Of course, concerning the bathroom bills and laws. And of course, this is not an extensive commentary. It is by no means an expansive commentary because I really don't have enough hours in the day to even begin to elaborate on the sheer silliness of this whole situation. But I want to address Loretta Lynch, Attorney General Loretta Lynch's speech that she gave just a few days ago regarding the bathroom bill and their issue with North Carolina. She says that and I'm not going to go into the entire speech. If you want to Google it or look it up, you can get the entire transcript of what she said online. But I want to take a few of the, the highlights that I gather from it, and just kind of elaborate on some of that a little bit. She said the legislature and the governor of North Carolina said they placed North Carolina in direct opposition to federal laws prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex and gender identity. And then more to the point, she says they created state-sponsored discrimination against transgender individuals who simply seek to engage in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security, a right taken for granted by most of us. Now, let me just begin by saying the Greek word for that is hoge washe, which translated to English, hogwash. Sheer hogwash is what it is. To begin with, Ms. Lynch is nothing more or less than an Eric Holder clone, which is why President Obama appointed her as AG to begin with, Attorney General. She's President Obama's and the administration's mouthpiece, and she is here representing the president and his administration. But that's just a side note. Ms. Lynch states that these transgender individuals, and let me add who make up about 0.03% of the entire population, she says they simply seek to engage in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security. Well, Ms. Lynch, what about when my mother or my wife or my daughters or my granddaughters seek to engage in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security? And she says it's a right taken for granted by most of us. Exactly my point. Because since the dawn of creation, it has been a common sense issue. Now, I know it isn't politically correct, and I won't win any popularity contests when I say this, and that's okay. But I want to say transgenderism, up until just the last few years, in all of the medical and psychological textbooks, was described as a mental disorder. But now it's a civil right. I'm here to tell you, it is still not only a mental disorder, but let me just go real radical and say it's a demonic disorder. These people, they need help. There's no doubt about that. They need help, not enablement. They need deliverance, not approval. And yes, we should love them, and we do love them, and everyone enough to speak the truth, to state the truth on the matter, and to seek to get them the help that they need, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Certainly, these people need help, not enablement. But so we need to love them, of course. And again, it's a matter of common sense, really. But let's just lay aside the transgender issue. This is not a matter of discrimination against transgenders. It is simply a matter of safety and privacy for all concerned, for all Americans. What about the discrimination against all of those who do not feel comfortable if a man decides that he feels like a woman and he uses that to commit perversion towards women? It's nothing more than a ruse or a smoke screen that he uses. But what if he enters that restroom and commits these perversions towards our women and our children who, as Attorney General Lynch said, simply seek to engage in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security? She goes on to say, and I quote, "Last week our Civil Rights Division notified state officials that House Bill 2 violates federal civil rights laws." Now, unquote. Ms. Lynch, first of all, that is a gross misinterpretation of civil rights. What about the civil rights of others, men, women, children, who deserve to have their right to privacy and protection from criminals and perverts? Do you mean to tell me, A.G. Lynch, that those convicted of sexual violations cannot live within so many feet of certain buildings, such as schools or daycare centers, but they can now walk into the same restroom with our ladies and our children simply because that particular day they claim to self-identify as a woman? Ridiculous. She goes on to say, the state of North Carolina and its governor chose to respond by suing the Department of Justice. You are mighty right, they did. And of course, as rightfully they should. Thank God for men like Governor Pat McCrory and Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest, who have the common sense and common decency and backbone to stand up for what is simply right. But of course, you thought they would just cower and fold before your federal bully tactics, just like many of our state leaders have been doing for the last several years. Huh? She goes on to say, as a result of their decisions, we are now moving forward. In other words, we're going to retaliate because you stood up to our bully tactics. We're going to take issue with you and retaliate against you because you wouldn't cower to our wishes and our interpretations and our bully tactics. She goes on to say, today, we are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the state of North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, for defending the safety of the public of North Carolina, I guess, and the University of North Carolina, because they are not complying like all the other good little left-wing liberal colleges and are taking a common sense stand because governmental bullying and stupidity is on the rise. She says, we are seeking a court order declaring House Bill 2's restroom restriction impermissibly discriminatory. Well, let me say that declaration is impermissibly stupid. She goes on to say, as well as a statewide bar on its enforcement. She says, we retain the option of curtailing federal funding to the North Carolina Department of Public Safety and the University of North Carolina as this case proceeds. My question is, can you say coercion? Can you say extortion? Can you say governmental blackmail? Or how about just plain old bully tactics? She says this action is about a great deal more than just bathrooms. Now, on that point, Ms. Lynch, Attorney General Lynch, we definitely agree. On that point, I am certainly in agreement, and that's probably about the only point of the whole speech that I'm in agreement with is that one line. She goes on to say, this is about the dignity and respect we accord our fellow citizens and the laws that we as a people and as a country have enacted to protect them. Indeed, to protect all of us. Yeah, that is, all of us except rational, decent, law-abiding citizens who have enjoyed the privacy and protection, for the most part, when engaging, again, in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security. Again, I quote, she says, and it's about the founding ideals that have led this country, haltingly but inexorably, in the direction of fairness, inclusion, and equality for all Americans. Well, actually, it is not about equal rights. It's about special rights for certain classes of mental disorders and or criminally driven perverts. Every American has equal rights, but also every American has equal responsibility as well. Responsibility to obey the law and to recognize the rights of others, to also feel safe and secure in a restroom facility. She says this is not the first time that we have seen discriminatory responses to historic moments of progress for our nation. Progress? Perversion is now called progress. Seems to me that God warned us of a day when we would call good evil and evil good. And I'd say we have plummeted to that degree the last several years. However, this nation has accelerated into it in the last 4 to 6 years. Now, this is where it really starts to get sickening. She says, we saw it in the Jim Crow laws that followed the Emancipation Proclamation. Attorney General Lynch, to even begin to compare what we are seeing today to the civil rights movement of the last century is to spit on the legacy and in the face of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This should actually be of the highest offense to every African American and indeed to every American in the nation, period. To have perversion placed in the same class as skin color? Come on. You have got to be putting me on. She says, we saw it in fierce and widespread resistance to Brown v. Board of Education, Brown versus Board of Education. And we saw it in the proliferation of state bans on same-sex unions intended to stifle any hope that gay and lesbian Americans might one day be afforded the right to marry. That right, of course, is now recognized as a guarantee embedded in our Constitution. Well, at this point, I'm wondering if A.G. Lynch, and for that matter, if most of our Washington bureaucrats, including the president, have read the Constitution recently, or for that matter, they've ever read it at all. Actually, gay marriage is nowhere embedded, quote unquote, in our Constitution. In fact, marriage, normal, natural, God-instituted marriage is nowhere addressed in our Constitution. If there is any kind of determination regarding marriage, it should be left up to the individual states. But in actuality, let me just go ahead and say this at the risk of being called fanatical. God established and originated it, and it has served us well. The institution of marriage has served us well for several thousand years. And God established it. He originated it. So actually, he should have the final word on it. And of course, we've been doing things in this nation for so long that are so out of harmony with the Constitution and the founders' principles, let alone the Word of God, at least since the mid part of the 20th century, that it's no wonder this country is in the mess that is in. She goes on to say this, and in the wake of that historic triumph, we have seen bill after bill in state after state taking aim at the LGBT community. Actually, since the Supreme Court has meddled into things and made unconstitutional rulings, state after state have actually been, she says, taking aim at the LGBT community, but they've actually been scrambling to protect themselves against the unconstitutional onslaught of these tyrannical rulings of the Supreme Court, and that actually threatens our liberty. Incidentally, Simple Civics 101 that we had in junior high school teaches us that there are 3 branches of government. This is elementary, but there are 3 branches of government, which are, of course, judicial, executive, and legislative. Legislative branches. Now, I don't claim to be a constitutional expert, but I know of nothing. I can read. I have several copies of the Constitution, physical copies that I carry in several portfolios on my smartphone, on my tablet, and on my computer. I have copies of the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and other Federalist papers as well. And I can read. The highest education I have, of course, is a bachelor's degree. So I can read and comprehend a number of things, including the Constitution. And I don't, for the most part, I don't think I have to be a constitutional expert to read what's plainly put there or interpret what the founders plainly meant by what they wrote. So no, I'm not a constitutional expert by any means, but I don't know of anything. I haven't read anything, but I do know some constitutional experts as well. And I think they will tell you the same thing. I don't think there's anything in the Constitution that has changed to give the Supreme Court, which falls under the judicial branch, the power of authority to make law. Only Congress, which is the legislative branch, has the authority to do so. Now, I may be an old country boy from South Carolina, but I can read and understand a few things. When the Supreme Court hands down an interpretation of an issue, it doesn't instantly become the law of the land, as so many supposedly intelligent people maintain. Only Congress has that authority. If Congress hasn't made it a law, the Supreme Court certainly cannot override Congress and make it law. I mean, that's just the way I read it and comprehend it and see it. I have for many years now. She goes on to say, some of these responses reflect a recognizably human fear of the unknown and a discomfort with the uncertainty of change. But this is not a time to act out of fear. This is a time to summon our national virtues of inclusivity, diversity, compassion, and open-mindedness. What we must not do, what we must never do, is turn on our neighbors, our family members, our fellow Americans for something they cannot control and deny what makes them human. Hold the phone. What? Are you serious? I mean, really, something they cannot control? Again, you're putting me on, right? Now, you can't control. And I agree, there are some things you cannot control. You cannot control, for instance, being born Caucasian. You can't control being born Indian. You can't control, you have no control whatsoever of being born African, no control of being born Chinese or any other nationality that you were born into. You and I have no say-so in that whatsoever. That is strictly and totally left up to God himself. Now, you can't control being born male or female. And again, I want to emphasize that not only biblically speaking, but scientifically speaking, psychologically speaking, and medically speaking, there are only two sexes. However, if that's the case, Ms. Lynch, that it is something they cannot control, as you say, then you must release every serial killer, murderer, rapist, thief, and on the list goes of people who are serving time in prison because of their behavior. That is something that, according to what you say, they can't control. So do you realize the lunacy of just that statement alone? They cannot control. Come on. She says, this is why none of us can stand by when a state enters a business of legislating identity. Drop the mic. What about when the federal government enters the business of unconstitutional coercion and extortion of states because the feds are trying to enter the business of legislating identity, and that without one shred of scientific or medical evidence to support them? Let me move on, she says, and insist that a person pretend to be something they are not. Really? Isn't that what a number of perverts and rapists are going to do? They're going to pretend they're someone that they're not to gain access to innocent women and little girls, and for that matter, little boys, and again, the list goes on and on. So she goes on to say this, or invents a problem that doesn't exist as a pretext for discrimination and harassment. Stop the clock. I underscored this statement she makes. Invents a problem that doesn't exist. Just read this article. I want to share just a little bit of it with you. And many of you have probably read it too. A woman and her 8-year-old daughter were shopping together in a store Saturday, May the 7th this year, when her daughter went into the restroom alone. The woman heard her daughter screaming and went into the bathroom to find a man carrying the unconscious girl into a stall. He had choked her with his hands, police said, or stated. Now, Ms. Lynch, does that sound like a problem that doesn't exist? Are you so far out of touch with reality that you make such an incredibly ridiculous statement? And she goes on to say this. You've been told that this law protects vulnerable populations from harm, but that just is not the case. Instead, what this law does is inflict further indignity on a population. And again, this population is about 0.03% of the entire U.S. population. She says it inflicts further indignity on a population that has already suffered far more than its fair share. That is a gross exaggeration of the facts. This law, she says, provides no benefit to society. All it does is harm innocent Americans. Again, the Greek word, hogwash. Ms. Lynch goes on to say, a little bit further down in that paragraph, let us not act out of fear and misunderstanding, but out of the values of inclusion, diversity, and regard for all that makes our country great. Now, I definitely believe what the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Timothy 1:7. And this is what he says. God has not given us the spirit of fear, a spirit of timidity, a spirit of cowardice, craven, cringing, fawning fear. He says, but he has given us a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind, a calm, well-balanced mind and discipline and self-control is what he's saying in this verse. So, Ms. Lynch, Mr. Obama, how about we act out of plain old, not fear, but plain old common sense and decency? Yes, out of love and out of a sound mind. She says this, let me also speak directly to the transgender community itself. The Department of Justice and the entire Obama administration wants you to know that we see you, we stand with you, and we will do everything we can to protect you going forward. A.G. Lynch, how about standing with and protecting the other 99.97% of Americans? She says, please know that history is on your side. Well, to that I would say only the history that you, this president, and in this administration, and liberal crowd chooses to rewrite and to distort. A.G. Lynch, President Obama, I know that to you and to many others in this administration, I'm nothing. I understand that. I'm just some ignorant, backwoods Southern preacher. Not even a blip on your radar. I understand that. But another word comes to mind regarding this whole lame speech. Swill. Can you say swill, boys and girls? You shouldn't have to look the word up. This administration, President Obama, Attorney General Lynch, the administration, you shouldn't have to look the word swill up because it's what you've been pumping out of Washington for years now. She goes on to say, this country was founded on a promise of equal rights for all. Correct. Equal rights, not special rights. And when you start ordering special rights for certain classes of people, then rights are no longer equal, but in fact, they become unequal. Ladies and gentlemen, I never dreamed, as I'm sure many of you never dreamed, that we would be witnessing such ridiculous, ludicrous, asinine logic that we're seeing today from supposedly intelligent, sentient beings such as our leaders are supposed to be. This is what happens when a society gravitates away from the principles of the Word of God. Now, you can say what you will, but true history testifies to the fact that our nation was originally founded upon the principles found in the Bible. Our founding fathers were graced with a wisdom and intelligence beyond themselves that could only have come from God and His Word. We sorely lack that kind of wisdom and intelligence in this nation today. We must pray and seek God's face for a national revival and a restoration of godly wisdom and intellect in our country, beginning in our pulpits and permeating every sphere of our society. I propose to you today, our only hope for America is the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for your time.